This video covers the techniques I use to restore and refurbish Honda Comstar wheels from the mid-1980s. This style wheel is found on the VF1000R and the NS400R, to name a few models. A quick disclaimer before starting the video: the wheels clearly state that they should not be disassembled. Anybody who follows this process to restore wheels of a similar style themselves does so at their own risk. The wheels we will be restoring in this video are from a 1985 VF1000R. Personally, I think this is one of the most underrated classic bikes from the mid-1980s. This particular bike has been in restoration for about the last 3 or 4 years and is due to complete at the end of this year. We're currently finalizing the paint and we'll be showing that in an upcoming video series. In order to refurbish these wheels, we will need to fully disassemble them. Before doing so, it's important to document every detail of the wheel, including how the spokes are arranged, how they overlap each other, how the hubs sit in relation to the rim. In order to ensure I can reassemble the wheel in exactly the same order it was disassembled, I use multiple reference points. So here for the rim, I'm using the valve, and for the inner hub, I'm using the casting marks. And by orientating the two, I can be sure that they go together exactly as they were originally. In order to remove the Torx head, nut and bolts holding the wheel together, a special tool is required. This is not a standard Torx size or pattern, but custom Torx bits are available, and I'll leave a link in the description. When removing the bolts, it's extremely important to document which side the bolt inserts from and which side the nut inserts from, so that when you reassemble the wheel, you reassemble it in exactly the same way. So now I'm just taking my time removing the bolts and then the spokes, and I'll take any additional notes on the assembly of the wheel if it's needed. And then ultimately we have a set of spokes, a rim and a hub. The process and procedure is exactly the same for the front wheel as it is for the back wheel. So at this stage, the rims and the spokes are sent out for black anodizing, and the bolts and the nuts are sent out for bright nickel plating. So I now prepare the hubs for new paint, and since the quality of the finish on the hubs is still very good, I've opted here to use that as the base for the new paint rather than trying to blast the hubs and primer them. So I take a red Scotch-Brite pad and I just key the surface of the hubs ready to accept the new paint. So now I'm carefully masking off all the surfaces that bolt directly to the spokes or the brake discs, as we want to avoid having paint between those components when we reassemble. And the technique I like to use here, because it's a little complex and difficult to get at, is the hammer technique. So we apply the masking tape over the surface that we want to protect, and then we use a light hammer and we tap around the edge of the surface, and we're then able to remove the excess masking tape. This technique is also an old school technique that's used to create gaskets in much the same way. So here I'm just using a low gloss black, highly durable chassis paint for the hubs, and I'm thinning the paint out as much as I can so that once the hubs are painted, they retain the original texturing of the castings. So now that we have the freshly painted hubs, and we also have the newly anodized rims, spokes, and nickel plated bolts, we can start the assembly process. Now, a few things to check before you start reassembling the wheel, particularly if you're going to be reassembling the front wheel and the back wheel at the same time, is to make sure you've got the tools you need available. So we've got the special Torx bits, but also that you sort the bolts and nuts accordingly. In the case of the VF1000R, there's actually different length bolts for the inner hub between the front wheel and the rear wheel. The bolts for the rim are the same length. And also, you can see here, I've got some red Loctite, which I'll use once the wheel has been final assembled. So the process I like to go through with the wheel is I'll take the rim, start with the rim, place the hub in the center. I'm obviously referring back to my notes to make sure I orientate the hub in the right position with the rim. So I'm checking the reference marks on the hubs to the valve hole on the rim. And then I assemble the spokes in a clockwise order until I have a loosely assembled wheel. Once I have that, I'm then mounting the wheel on a wheel stand, and I tighten all the bolts, and again I use a clockwise pattern for tightening, but you can use a crisscross pattern if you wish. The results seem to be the same. And I go around and I hand tighten all the bolts to make sure that the wheel runs true before I Loctite them. So once I'm happy that the wheel has been assembled correctly and is running true, I remove each bolt one at a time, apply the red thread lock, reassemble, and I torque each bolt to the same torque setting as the rotor bolts, which in the case of the VF1000R is 30 foot-pounds. And as I go around the wheel clockwise again, removing each bolt, refitting the bolt, I mark them, and then that way on completion I can check back again over the wheel and make sure that I haven't missed one. Obviously this is the most critical part of the assembly from a safety perspective. And here we have the finished product. The process was the same for both the front wheel and the rear wheel. There's some slight differences obviously in some of the components, but the process overall is the same, and the results speak for themselves, and it's really this attention to detail that really makes the restoration stand out. So yeah, just waiting now for some new tires, and we'll be ready to assemble back onto the bike.